Welcome everyone to another episode of the Languages Pedagogy podcast. As we always have wonderful guests, today is not going to be different. We have another wonderful guest, Lara Barnes. Welcome, Lara. Thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting this invitation to talk a little
Yeah,
bit about misbehavior and a whole bunch of little things that we're going to be talking today. But first, would you please introduce yourself, tell the audience who you are, what you do, and what exactly is your work?
yeah, absolutely. So my name's Lara Barnes, and I have a company called Brain Development UK. My tag on Instagram is at Brain Development UK. And you can find me at braindevelopment.co.uk. So I work with children who have system and function issues. So perhaps they are very anxious and not emotionally regulated, or perhaps they're not speaking and they are not able to converse or interact, or they're not interacting, or they're not giving eye contact. They might be emotionally shut down and unhappy in themselves. And I help to rebuild their brainstem from the bottom up. And I have trained in this because of my own son. And then I helped him, and now I'm out helping other parents, not just in the UK, but all across Europe, and working with people in America and Australia as well.
Wonderful. That sounds like you're having a really good time there, helping a lot of people, and that's amazing. I love it. That's positivity, and that's what we need actually more. And today's episode, today the title is When Learning Looks Like Misbehavior. What does that phrase mean to you? And why do you think so many educators misunderstand the behaviors they see in the classroom?
Yeah, so behavior is often the brain telling us that it needs something, not that that child is choosing to be difficult.
Hmm.
So it's not behavior, it's actually brain development. So if I look at it from a functional neurology perspective, it's one of the biggest misconceptions is that we have in education now is that behavior is something children are choosing, and perhaps it's bad parenting, or they're not getting enough sleep, or their diet isn't right, or what are the things that are causing that child to misbehave in a classroom. But we're seeing an increasing number of children struggling with anxiety, emotional dysregulation, attention, sensory difficulties, and like challenging behavior. So really, what is wrong with the child? Well, it's their nervous system trying to tell us that something's wrong, because every behavior is communication. And when you look at it from a brain development perspective, and what I do, and I look at it from a system and function, what's not happening or hasn't happened for that child during their whole development trajectory, or what's changed, because other things could change that child. Like viruses can actually change a child's behavior, but if they were perfectly fine before, it's got to be a biochemistry situation. But if it's always been that way and they've always struggled with either their motor movements or the ability to manage their emotions, one thing I do describe to parents and teachers that I'm working with is that the brain doesn't develop from top down. The brain develops from the bottom up, and you have your nervous system, because you basically are born with a brain stem. So you have your nervous system and your respiratory system. You don't have emotional regulation when you're a baby. You don't have impulse control, or concentration, or executive function, or even born with resilience, right? You learn all those things, and it's built through how the brain builds, and it's built from the brain stem up. So
Mhm.
it's the brainstem is responsible for survival. You come out with these things called reflexes, primitive reflexes, that should integrate by 12 months old, and they're given to you as automatic movement patterns, and they control breathing, heart rate, digestion, posture, muscle tone, like balance. And those primitive reflexes help you move, and you exercise out those reflexes so that you build the foundations of the brain, so that you can you use your sensory processing to help you integrate those. And so everything's built upon those. So the
Yeah,
foundations, if they're not organized enough, the higher parts of the brain have to work much harder. And that's why you start to see children with behavioral issues. It's like they're stuck at, the terrible twos because they don't quite understand how to emotionally regulate themselves when you say no. Does that make
exactly.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense actually. Exactly. But here's the thing, one of the things that you mentioned there that I would like to go back a little bit. It's you mentioned that you have some teachers that you actually work with teachers, right?
Yeah.
And but in your experience, what are some of the most common behaviors that teachers mistake for laziness, defiance, or a lack of motivation when they may actually be signs of an underlying neurological challenge?
Yeah. So those are the children that lay on the desk and they're quite floppy, or they like move their arm around like that to write, or they're writing slanted. There's a lot going on there with those children, in terms of the layering of the brain. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But those children that wrap their legs around the chair to stabilize themselves,
Mm,
or the children that can't sit still, those are all reflexes. So the one where, the arms coming round, that's, they're finding it very difficult to grip the pencil in the right way. That's the palmar grasp. They are quite awkward in their movements and how they're sitting, and that is the ATNR reflex. That's how you turn your head, because if you're on a bike and you see a
mhm,
child on a bike, and as they turn their head, their elbow comes out, and then they're like, oh, I don't like this bike, and I
mhm.
won't ride a bike because I don't like it. It's because every time they move their head, their elbow moves, right? So that doesn't feel comfortable because that ATNR reflex is still there. And the children that put their legs around the bottom of the chair, the chair legs, those are the children with the STNR reflex. You should be able to move your head all the way up on an all fours position, all the way up and then all the way down without your elbows like bending or collapsing. And lots of children have these reflexes which hold them back into lower level brain networks. And the children that may run funny, or are not quite upright enough, or they run on the insides of their feet, or the outsides of their feet, those children have what's called a Babinski reflex. So there's all these
Mm,
symptoms that you will see, and when you kind of start to look at these children, some children have facial asymmetry too. One side of their face comes up but the other side doesn't, or they
mm.
may have a bigger eye one side and the other eye is quite normal. These are all things that are showing that there is something going on in the brainstem that needs to be corrected. And there's lots of reasons why all these things happen.
Yeah. Definitely, but here's a little issue that I think so because as you know, we have a problem in the system. Sometimes the system doesn't actually help us or we don't have enough guidance. Like
Yeah,
people
yeah,
like you telling us how to do it because not all the teachers knows about it. Some of them get or receive little or no formal training in neuroscience. And I think this
yeah.
must be a must. So from that perspective, practical perspective, what should every educator understand about how the brain influences learning and behavior?
I think we're moving into, the next decade. We're going to need to understand more of this. And the
Hmm.
reason I say that is because we live in a very toxic world, and the symptomology that
Definitely.
I'm seeing is being driven by the toxicity in our environment, and for many reasons, right? So, the birth might not have gone well for that child. The reduction in movement in infancy for that child may not have helped them integrate those reflexes. They may have been in a chair a lot. They may have been contained in a little pen. They may have not been able to move around as much as they should have done. We're not outside enough. We don't give our children enough tummy time. We've got a shocking amount of toxins in our food. There's so many environmental influences. There's so much more information because we eat so much more yummy stuff than ever we should.
Mm.
We live in a high stress environment. We get reduced sleep. So what that means is the teachers start seeing all of these consequences which end up in like these behaviors. But it comes down to, we need to understand this because we're going to see more and more of it. Not because, and there's not that many of me and other practitioners trying to change all of this out there, or we're not working early enough in the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I've got head teachers writing to me, asking for me to help them with putting some kind of sensory circuit program together, help them and their teachers understand, because they've got 30% of their class with additional needs now, and they don't have the funding to put one-on-ones, and it's not scalable, right? It's not enough room and seats in a room full of children to put
Exactly.
one-on-ones with 30% of the class. And that is not a sustainable solution. So can we put sensory circuits in? And I've done it for 2 other schools, and they saw huge results in just putting a sensory
Wow.
circuit in the morning for 20 minutes, and get these children moving in a way that we can help integrate those reflexes. And it works, and you start to see more regulated children. They become calmer. And also, we've had some huge changes with some children where they were very like up and down and very emotional, and we started to see more of a stable child. We had children that were not speaking in class, and parents coming in and saying, "What have you done to my child? She's now speaking at home."
Wow.
Like she was quite a within child, um, and it started to bring that child out. So the forward thinking teachers and caregivers and educators out there are looking for these types of options, because they are the ones managing the children in the class day to day, and there's no further help from the government looking at this, or
Exactly.
the wider authorities in doing anything, because it's not even on their agenda. Things like this take years to get put in place, but it's the forward thinking head teachers that are getting in touch with me saying, how can you come in and train my teachers to understand this more? How can we help them? Like, we want to help them. We care about the children. We want to put them on the right trajectory. That's what our job is. It's not just, teaching them. We can't teach them. They're not ready to
Exactly.
learn. So when you start to understand that the brain builds from the bottom up, um, and I can share a diagram if you want me to,
Wow.
which is quite is. I'll just send a request to you, and you can
Okay.
let me share the
Done.
screen,
Yes.
and I can share something on screen, which is it's called the pyramid of learning. You can Google this in the images on Google, but when you understand how the brain builds, it builds from the bottom up. So the baby comes out with just a brain stem, and from the
Mm-hmm.
brain it develops. So the brain stem's at the bottom of the
Yeah.
skull. Baby comes out, and the brain stem has your respiratory system in it. It has your ability to breathe, your heart rate. It has those reflexes. It has all of your cranial, trigeminal, and vagus nerves. And like building the face is so important in terms of the development. It shows a symmetrical brain stem. So the child with the smile that doesn't go up one side, that's a asymmetrical brainstem. A child with a bigger eye, that's an asymmetrical brainstem. When you look
Mm.
inside a child's mouth and you see that arch, one side's down, that shows the weaker side of the brainstem. So what we do is we look at rebuilding that child from the bottom up, and we really stimulate the face and all of those nerves. And we also then do these exercises. And what I mean by stimulating the face is we use something called a Resi Max, which is vibration, and we stimulate the cranial nerves, the trigeminal nerve branches, and the vagus nerve in the neck. And we then work with them to do certain movement patterns, which are going to integrate those reflexes. But we use things like a little vibrational plate, like so that the child can feel themselves in space. Lots of kids can't feel themselves, and they can't relate to other people. They can't smell, they can't relate to other people. Those sensory inputs are so important. And that helps their, once you've got those reflexes integrated, it helps their motor system, their
Mm-hmm.
body to move more comfortably. And then they start to, really feel themselves in space. And that's when speech comes. So once you get the body kind of moving and you built the motor strip, right? When the baby's, gets to the point of standing, their motor strip is developed. But on the motor
Exactly.
strip, your sensory motor system. And then on the other side, you have your speech motor capability. And that's why some kids don't speak, because their motor strip isn't developed. And that's the green bar. You can't get a child to speak and go on to communication and socialization and attention and learning in school, for them to, without those networks being able to connect. And that's all I'm
Exactly.
doing, helping connect those networks. So when you see the top, which is where the teachers are operating, and you know,
Executive functioning. Yeah.
right, you've got all these layers underneath, and if they're just a bit squishy, the layers of the cake is a bit squishy, and those systems aren't able to connect, and those road systems aren't all in. How are you expecting a child to sit and be still and have attention and focus and actually learn and take in information and apply that information when they still have these reflexes, their body isn't able to move in the right way, and it's hard for them.
So from bottom to up in this case, we have to go like that, not like from the upper part to the bottom, right?
No, it's
So
bottom
that's
up.
exactly what we're doing it wrong in the class because we're not actually seeing how the way the brain actually works.
It's top down. Everything at school is top down. That's why I realized with my own son, we got to like 6, 7, and the learning for him was really difficult, and I couldn't quite understand
Hmm.
why. Memory, learning, retention, reading, writing, holding a pencil, applying that, and putting thought to paper, really hard. And
So
that's
in order,
because,
yes,
yeah, all of these systems underneath were just squishy, right? They weren't connected. He
yeah,
still had reflexes. He couldn't feel his body properly. He was oversensitive. He had motor issues. He wasn't able to form sentences, and everything was just a bit jumbled in communication. And so his social side was, really strong. He wanted to be with people all the time, but his ability to focus just wasn't there. He couldn't sit for longer than like a minute doing something.
exactly.
It's like you have ADHD, but I knew he didn't. He just couldn't sit. His body wasn't allowing him to sit because he had all of these reflexes.
Wow. Well, we're gonna actually go to that part as well. But here's something I really love actually this pyramid over here because it actually portrays exactly what we need to know in order to
Yeah,
actually get the kids to learn properly. So the executive functioning, which is in the top, then we have also, for example, the student's ability to stay organized. So before getting to the executive functioning, they need to know that, right? Am I right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they go like from the lower part to the top. So you also mentioned the
Yeah,
vagus nerve. What is the
mhm.
main function in this case?
To regulate the nervous system. So if they have a weaker vagus nerve, so if a child isn't able to latch on at birth and they have, a weak latch, or they have constant reflux and they're
Mhm.
not able to, keep the milk down that they're taking, and they are constantly bringing that milk up, that's a reflux. That's a weak vagus nerve. So you
Got
can
it.
stimulate the vagus nerve by doing lots of things, whether it's humming or gargling
Yeah.
or using vibration. On this little cool device we use, it's got these little tongs, and this is
Oh,
called a Resi Max, and we can put that on the neck, and it's like quite calming because it just vibrates, and you can vibrate the vagus nerve via the neck. And then there is another position called the Simba concha, and that's just in the ear up here, not in the hole, but in the ear up here. It's called the Simba concha. And that really helps stimulate the vagus nerve. So we stimulate the vagus nerve that way, and we strengthen these nerves. And once you strengthen these nerves in the
mm,
brainstem, and also you're working on that trigeminal 3 branches
mhm.
too, you are really, you're rebuilding, you're stimulating those nerves for them
Yeah.
to actually start to function. And I see this with the children that I'm working with. I'm getting non-verbal children to speak through
Wow.
stimulation and building out the foundations underneath in order to get to that yellow strip. which is, speech,
Yeah, of course. Ooh,
feeling
this
themselves.
is this is really eye-opening. I really love it. There are certain things over here that I'm actually really learning right now. So, in my previous episode, I had other teachers and other psychologists as well talking a little
Yeah.
bit about ADHD, another one talking about dyslexia, but I haven't actually had someone talking about autism. And I remember that we were talking a little bit before having our meeting right now, a little bit of autism, and you shocked me actually with your perspective on it because it's the first time I actually hear it. So going a little bit to the ADHD,
Yeah.
talking a little bit about that before passing to dyslexia and autism.
Hmm.
Beyond the stereotype of the hyperactive child, what are
Yeah.
some less obvious signs that teachers should recognize?
With ADHD,
Hmm, ADHD, yes.
eyes. It's all eyes. So when you have a child with ADHD, your eyes should operate together, right?
Hmm.
But what I see it a lot, is they may have just a couple of reflexes that are holding them back at the bottom, but their eyes and their balance may be pretty good, right? So it goes reflexes, balance, eyes. So when you start looking at these children, if you sit in front of them just from the midline and you go to their right and you do that for 10, can they track 10 to the right, smooth, right? Smooth pursuits, no jumps, no like looking over here, no moving their head. They have to do it with their head still. You need to be able to use your eyes independently from your head. So if you move it and all of a sudden they're looking straight at you, but the finger's like over here and they're not even looking at the finger, you're going to know that their eyes aren't able to track in that direction past like 3, let's just say. And that's like a network that's weaker, and then you get them back on track, and then you get them to track again, and then you do it to the other side, right, from the midline to
Hmm.
the other side. And what you might see is you're probably going to see on the right side, their right side, that they can't track as well as on the left because they have weaker networks. And then that, imagine your eyes constantly moving, right? So you've got a strong left and then a lagging right, strong left and then a lagging right. What does that do to your vision all the time? It makes you just feel out of control. And that's what I see in ADHD. And I see so many kids that are medicated and they say, but we've been to the opticians. I'm like, it's not an optician. You need to see a behavioral optometrist that understands this from a neurological point of view to help align the eyes for convergence and divergence. And then you have a calmer child. You can get them off the meds. But nobody's looking at this.
Ooh, that this one is a good one, and I hope actually our audience, our listeners actually just can get to this one and take notes of it because it's really important actually for us teachers to recognize it and put them into practice. So now that we just talk a little bit about ADHD, what happens with dyslexia in this case? Because it's often reduced to reading problems, right? But
Yeah,
it's much more
yeah,
complex than that.
it is.
What are
'Cause
most of
my
misconceptions we have here?
My son was diagnosed with dyspraxia and sensory processing, and then I went on a functional neurology course and
Mhm.
understood the brain, and then I realized that he wasn't dyspraxic, he was mislabeled, and he was dyslexic. And he was dyslexic because he had all of these reflexes in his nervous system. His anxiety was huge. He had, he had his Moreau reflex, which is that that fright or flight
Um,
reflex, and that holds them back because it keeps them in lower level brain networks, as well as having a lot of the reflexes. And that ATNR reflex is pretty significant for learning, and also the ADHD child. And the ATNR reflexes, you get them on all fours, right? Get them on all fours, and then you turn their head. And as you get their head, you turn it. As you turn their head, their elbow, the opposite elbow bends, right? Turn their head, the opposite elbow bends. That shouldn't happen. That's a reflex that you need to get rid of because that's keeping them in those lower level brain networks, but it's also keeping them in that heightened state. And I had a teacher, a SEN teacher, say to me, he was a pretty forward thinking one. he said to me, "What have you done over the past week with your son Archie?" And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, I integrate," and I just said it. I said, "I've integrated his AT&R reflex." And he said, "What is that?" And then I told him about it, and he said, "Lara, he is able to learn. He is on the carpet listening. He's with me. He's no longer moving around. He's no longer completely looking at everything. He's not distracted. Like, it's incredible. Show me what to do." And I put in a sensory circuit program because he said, "I've done sensory circuits, tunnels and over like little beams." And he said, "It's useless. It doesn't do a thing." And I put in a sensory circuit program and I taught him all of the reflexes. And, we couldn't touch the children. And so, grabbing their head, but we could do certain things like there's a lizard exercise where you teach them to move their arm and their leg at the same time and their head. And we named all of the exercises as animals. And he did it for 20 minutes in the morning every day. And children would change. He saw
Mm-hmm.
changes, more regulated changes.
Wow.
Um, and so dyslexia is all of it. Dyslexia is reflexes, terrible balance, because Archie had terrible balance, and then eye alignment. So it's looking at
Wow.
everything from foundation, bottom up, all the time. And then autism. Autism is a disconnection from the body in terms of there's so much inflammation that they don't look you in the eye. They may be not speaking. Maybe they are speaking and they're quite, very articulate, and they're probably exceptionally clever because their left brain from maths and reading is
The
and mem
logical.
is huge, the logical side, but their emotional connection, which is their right side of their brain, is why they won't look at you. They don't feel their body in space. But once you start to work on that sensory motor system on the motor strip, and you get rid of those reflexes and you get them to feel their body, by stimulating their body with vibration, with different smells up the right side, like on their right collar, like peppermint or rosemary or lemon, and you get them smelling. So smelling and feeling their body, that's
Mm-hmm.
when speech comes. But also that's when you start to see them cognitively come round and they're taking in everything, but they start to look at you. Then they start to recognize other people, and then they're intrigued by other people, and that's when they start making friends. And I
Got it.
see. So it's those things, but you have to do the same thing. You do the reflexes, the balance, and the eyes, right?
Mm. Yeah.
All it's the same, but it's just treating the children differently depending on the symptoms. So it's system and function. Can I show you another diagram?
Of course. Of course.
So I'm going to show you this one, which is my model, and it's quite exciting. I love it. I love working within this. Let me just share. So this is my model that I built out, and this is what I take my children through that come through my clinic, and it's a 6-phase model to brain development. So you may
Mm.
have a child that's in survival phase, and what I mean by that is you have a child that's quite fearful, don't like you coming near them, they're quite scared in their own body. So they're in that fright or flight. They have a very severe Moreau. Their nervous system is like on edge the whole time. So that's where they start. And then once we start doing a lot of the stimulation to the face, we get them on a power plate, we use smell, and we start to get the meltdowns shortening, because they start to feel themselves a bit more, then they start to sleep better and they get improved eye contact. But it's the awakening phase that we get them to in stage 3, where they start smelling everything. Smell is so incredibly important for social interaction. So
Mm-hmm.
smell, and then we get them to start to feel their body. They start to feel themselves when they need to go to the toilet, and they'll tell you. And they start to feel when their sleeves are wet, or their body temperature. They start to realize that they're hot in their jumper, whereas before they just wear it until they'd sweat. And that's what my
Mm-hmm.
son used to do. And he used to look so sweaty. And I say, well, why don't you take your jumper off? I don't understand. How do you not feel that? And he didn't feel his body. So once we get them to feel themselves, that's when speech starts to come. And that's when like more language starts to come, and then more connection and cognitive understanding of what's going on. And then you start to go through that integration phase where, speech becomes more descriptive, that explosion of speech. I've got loads of kids to that phase now, and their kind of intrigue on things that they were never interested in. So, whether it be playing with Lego or, painting properly and
Yeah.
holding a pen properly and a paintbrush, and, those kind of skills start to come, and they can move better. And then you
Mm.
start to go into like, they can jump. Lots of kids can't jump. I mean, it's
Wow.
unbelievable. They can't jump, they can't
Wow.
stand on one leg, they can't stand one foot in front of the other and stand still. It's just they're just not able to. But then you get, their little personality starts coming out at
Yeah.
stage 5, and they start doing imaginative play. And parents say to me, he doesn't play. He doesn't has no interest. He looks really
Wow.
unhappy. And when you see that, it doesn't take very long to get these children to where they start feeling themselves and they start smiling and feeling happier in themselves, and they start to, do pretend play. And I've had videos from parents where they've sent me videos of their phone around the door where their child's sitting there playing with little figures, and they've
Wow.
never done that before. And I mean, it's amazing for me to be part of that journey with that parent and support them. But then they start, start learning properly, and then they go into that consolidation phase with, they're more emotionally regulated. Like they're hugely emotionally regulated all the way through from, stage 3 to 5. But you start to see more of a child that's more comfortable in themselves, and
Yeah.
they're improved confidence, and you start to see a stronger independence. They get that kind of independence, and once you've got them to that stage, literally they're off. But you just need to build those foundations in that order. And I think a lot of parents um, do lots of therapies when their children are just not ready for it. So if you think about that pyramid, you could come in with ABA
Hmm.
therapy, speech therapy, or, you know, the child, that's the yellow bar in the middle. If you haven't got the
Yes.
foundation in, how can you expect that child to flourish in that therapy? And I think that's the biggest thing that I learned through this whole process of learning functional neurology was, oh my God, it's so possible. They're just little brains. Even though he's 5 years old, there's still 5 years of brain development. It's not going to happen like in 3 weeks, but
Of course.
you can do it over a period of 6 months and see huge changes in this child if you know how to do it and you're guided through that. And it's so possible to change these children. And I just
Definitely.
help parents on the food. And we work with a functional nutritionist and a naturopath, and she can do lab testing and understand what's going in the gut and how to reduce the inflammation. And we re-educate these families on how to eat as well. And it
Of
really, the gut to brain connection, never underestimate it. So yeah, I'll stop there because I felt like I was
No,
rambling.
no, actually, no.